The Minnesota Vikings had 11 draft picks in this year's draft, and it was a pretty impressive draft for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, highlighted especially by the third and fourth round, where the Vikings stacked up on those mid day two draft picks and just swung on everywhere they needed and filled a lot of roles for the Minnesota Vikings. And honestly, I like this draft class so much that I honestly believe all 11 of these players can make the active roster. Now, it's going to be tough for a lot of the times, those 6th and 7th round, although the Vikings didn't pick in the 7th round this year. Those 6th round draft picks, it's pretty tough for them to make the active roster, and obviously the 5th round draft picks have to earn their spot as well. So we're going to take a look, and we're going to be grading every draft pick for the Minnesota Vikings. And obviously starting with the first round draft pick, which we talked about already on this channel, and that is the Minnesota Vikings trading back and grabbing Christian Darrisaw. So first of all, I would just like to highlight this trade. I mean, that was a phenomenal trade made by Rick Spielman. Rick Spielman was waiting at the 14th pick to go for two guys, I think. Now, they did say that they were targeting Justin Fields, which I'm pretty surprised that that's actually true. I was not expecting the Vikings to actually target a quarterback first round. Now, I can see why they did target a quarterback in the first round. I just didn't think it was actually going to happen. And then Rashaan Slater, also, I do think the Vikings would have drafted Rashaan Slater at the 14th pick. But trading down 9 spots to the 23rd pick and grabbing Christian Darrisaw, acquiring 2 picks in the 3rd round with the New York Jets, was very impressive. And they hit on all of those picks, starting with Christian Darrisaw, who was drafted 23rd overall, offensive tackle from Virginia Tech, who was a top 15 prospect by PFF going into this draft, and had a phenomenal 2020 season where he had 669 snaps, allowing 0 sacks and 0 hits. So a very impressive season for Christian Darrisaw, and I believe he will be a starting left tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, not because he's necessarily the best, and I can't say that he's totally ready to be a left tackle right away, but just because we need someone who can play left tackle. I'm not very comfortable with Ezra Cleveland starting at left tackle from what I saw last year at right guard. He didn't have a terrible season at right guard. I just didn't see left tackle potential. Now, obviously, they drafted him to be a left tackle, but once again, you can't just draft players and throw them at one position and expect that they're going to look as good as they did in college. So I would expect Christian Darrisaw to be our starting left tackle, and I would like to see Ezra Cleveland move to left guard. Now, who's going to be our right guard? We'll get into that. I do want Wyatt Davis to be our right guard. So a very successful trade for Rick Spielman and the Minnesota Vikings, where they traded down 9 spots, drafting a starting left tackle and 2 potential starters in the 3rd round. With that on top of it, that was a very successful trade, and I'm happy to see Christian Darrisaw come to play with the Minnesota Vikings in purple and gold. In the 3rd round, the Vikings drafted 4 players in the 3rd round, did not have a 2nd round draft pick because they traded away for Yannick Ngakoue with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, we all know how that went, but Vikings did get back at least a 3rd round draft pick for Yannick Ngakoue, so that means they had their initial draft pick, 2 picks from the Jets, and then the picks from the Ravens when trading back away Yannick Ngakoue after only playing 4 games. So with the 2nd pick in the 3rd round, 66 overall, the Minnesota Vikings drafted Kellen Mond, a quarterback from Texas A&M. That isn't an A. That is a draft pick. I am very happy to see him come play with the Minnesota Vikings. On top of that, just to make it even better, I'm happy Sean Mannion is not coming back, because there was nothing that even made Sean Mannion look like an NFL quarterback at all. Now, we only did get to see him a couple games, but on top of that, I did say I would rather see Nate Stanley as our backup, but once again, Kellen Mond has a very high ceiling in the NFL. He is a potential starter in the future if he can reach that possible spot. His ceiling is so much higher than Nate Stanley is what I'm saying here, whereas Nate Stanley, yes, he's a good backup. Now, obviously, coming from a 7th round draft pick out of Iowa, we don't expect a whole lot from him, but he's a good backup. But once again, he's never going to be a starter in the NFL. I just don't see that happening with him. But once again, Kellen Mond, quarterback from Texas A&M, that is a. I do think the Vikings would have used this draft pick to draft Kyle Trask, which honestly, I would rather have Kellen Mond than Kyle Trask, if I'm going to be honest. Now, Kyle Trask and Kirk Cousins, it'd probably be better for him to sit behind him because their play styles are a little bit more similar than Kellen Mond, but still, great draft pick. He can make plays with his arms and his legs and is a potential starter, as Kirk Cousins does have 2 more years left on his contract, as he is 32 years old. He is a potential starter in 2023 when Kirk Cousins' contract is done. I believe Kirk is expected to make like 35 million in 2022. It's insane. So if the Vikings don't bring back Kirk Cousins, if we don't even make the playoffs these next 2 seasons, I would expect Kellen Mond to be a starter with the Vikings. Now, once again, we have to see how his progression is going to go going into 2023. But in a couple years, I'm very happy to see this happen. And the Vikings targeting a quarterback in this draft, I didn't expect it to happen. Now they did in the first round, drafting or trying to go for Justin Fields, which was a bit of a surprise, but I'm very happy that the Vikings did target quarterback in the first 2 days of the draft. Next up, we have Chaz Surratt. Now this was a needed pick. It was a bit of a reach, though. I did not want to see this player go with the Minnesota Vikings in the third round. He was expected to go somewhere in the fourth round, and on top of that, the Vikings could have got an equivalent pass rusher somewhere in the fifth and sixth round on top of that, just because of the amount of linebackers there are in this year's draft and every year's draft. The Vikings could have found an equivalent talent somewhere around there. Now, he's a very good pass rusher. Now, I don't really see starting potential. Now, you're supposed to try to go for players who could be starters in the third round, but he's going to be under Adam Zimmer, and maybe Adam Zimmer can coach him up to that. He has a lot of development to go as a linebacker. He will be a backup to Anthony Barr, a backup to Nick Vigil, who will be our outside linebackers this upcoming season, with obviously Eric Kendricks as a middle linebacker. Thing about that, though, Cameron Smith has also been injured a lot, who I was very high in Cameron Smith. Anthony Barr has been injured, so it's possible he could be a starter if there is injuries, but I have to give it a C-. I'm not a huge fan of this draft pick. It was a needed pick. Obviously, the Vikings, on top of that, did lose Eric Wilson, so it was a bit of a needed pick as the Vikings had a role to fill at the linebacker position, but they could have filled that role somewhere else in the draft. I just didn't see this as a very valuable draft pick. Next up, though, total different story. From the New York Jets, Wyatt Davis, offensive guard from Ohio State. This is an A+. I mean, Vikings, one thing about the Vikings, we cannot draft offensive linemen. We have to get already developed offensive linemen because we cannot develop them into the NFL. Getting players like Darrisaw and Wyatt Davis in the first and third round is a big sigh of relief for us Minnesota Vikings, because Wyatt Davis has shown a lot of potential in college, and the only reason why he was still available at the 86th pick, which was a very valuable pick, was due to injuries and due to, obviously, he didn't have the best season last year. But on top of that, him coming with the Minnesota Vikings, I really hope he can be a starter. If he is a starter at right guard, I will be so happy, because that would mean Dakota Dozier is not going to have to be starting. We'll have Ezra Cleveland start at left guard, and then if Darrisaw can start at left tackle, if the Vikings have that offensive line, if Wyatt Davis and Christian Darrisaw can work, I honestly think the Vikings will win the division, because that's how big of a difference it would make for Kirk Cousins under center. We've invested way too much in the offensive line right now to it be as bad as it was last season. Our entire offensive line will be first and second round draft picks, and then Wyatt Davis in the third round if he does work and he can play right guard, and we won't have to see another season of Dakota Dozier or Drew Samia. Drew Samia might not even make this upcoming roster, and that's pretty sad considering he was a third round draft pick in 2018. So if Wyatt Davis can take his spot, I would be very happy to see that. And then Patrick Jones, defensive end from Pittsburgh. Now, the difference between Chaz Surratt and Patrick Jones, although they're both a bit of a reach, I'm fine with the Vikings reaching on defensive tackles or defensive linemen, because we have Andre Patterson as our defensive line coach. He can take any athletic guy and turn them into superstars. Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, now DJ Wanham. He can take these defensive ends and put them into the starting role, develop them into it. Look at DJ Wanham, who was a defensive end drafted in the fourth round of last year. He already looks like starting talent. He's going to start this upcoming season. That's my prediction. I do believe he will start over Stephen Weatherly. Vikings can draft defensive ends in the fourth round. Now, I do give it a C, obviously, because it is a bit of a reach when you're talking about value of the pick, but Vikings just have too good of a coaching staff to really hate on this draft pick, because Andre Patterson can develop any defensive line coach or any defensive lineman. So the Vikings dominated the third round. With Kellen Mond and Wyatt Davis, now, I know I was hating on the Chaz Surratt draft pick, but once again, he is an outside linebacker, pass rusher. He can make an immediate impact in the NFL. Now, he is still having to develop into that role, as Adam Zimmer can help him develop into being a linebacker, because he did take the transition from quarterback to linebacker, and he's only been a linebacker for a couple of years now, so we're going to have to see a bit of a transition with him. So it is a role that was needed to fill. Same with Patrick Jones. These were roles that the Vikings had to fill, but I'm huge fans of drafting Kellen Mond and Wyatt Davis. In the fourth round, the Minnesota Vikings, 119th overall, drafted Kene Nwagnu. I can't quite remember how to say his name, but I give this one a B, but I'm a huge fan of this draft pick. From Iowa State, running back. Now, the thing about the Vikings, we needed a running back. Yes, we had three pretty good running backs. I mean, obviously Dalvin Cook, star number one, star running back in the NFL. Alexander Madison is a great backup running back. And then Amir Abdullah does make some plays in the NFL. Thing about our starting 2 running backs, they get injured every year. Dalvin Cook has not played a full season in the NFL. Same with Alexander Mattison. So we needed another running back. And he can run a 4.4. What that means for the Minnesota Vikings, Dalvin Cook can break the tackles. Alexander Mattison can do the cutbacks and with his footwork. And he has the speed. So if you find a hole for him, he can make a big play. He can get those 40-yard touchdowns when he does find a hole and can go to his full acceleration. So I'm excited to see what he can do with the Minnesota Vikings. He will be a running back 3 and a possible kick returner. I would like to see him as a starting kick returner over Amir Abdullah and punt returner. This would be a huge sigh of relief as the Vikings have really struggled at the special teams return game these last couple seasons. And if he can be our starting special teams returner, I would be very excited to see that happen. So I love the draft pick. I'm a huge fan of the draft pick. The only reason why I give it a B is because when you're talking about value, there's other players the Vikings could have went with here instead. And then Cameron Bynum, cornerback from Cal. I give this pick a B+. Now, he is a corner, but he's going to play safety with the Minnesota Vikings, and this was a needed position the Vikings had to fill on top of that after losing Anthony Harris, obviously, and then bringing in Xavier Woods on a 1-year contract. Vikings had to bring in a safety somewhere in the draft class, and this was a pretty good spot for them to bring in a safety. Now, our backup safeties, he's going to be our backup to Harrison Smith and our backup to Xavier Woods because our safeties don't look good at all. Our safeties are Josh Metellus, who was drafted in the 6th round of last year, and then we have 2 UDFA guys, Miles Dorn and Dylan Mabin, 2 2020 UDFA guys. So our safety group is not very good. Now, our starting safeties are great with Harrison Smith and Xavier Woods, but our backups, we have no depth at that position. So him bringing into depth with the position is going to be good for the Minnesota Vikings. I do also believe they're going to use him on special teams, which would be very useful because we need all the help we can get on special teams. And then with the 134th pick, the Minnesota Vikings drafted Janarius Robinson, defensive end from Florida State. I give this a B. Another draft pick, obviously a defensive lineman, and you take defensive linemen in the 4th round. In fact, I can't remember a draft class where the Vikings didn't draft a defensive lineman in the 4th round. We have a coach like Andre Patterson. We don't even need to wait. We can wait till day 3 to draft defensive linemen because he can develop them. He can take athletic guys and develop them into the NFL. And this was a very good draft pick. And obviously, since we have Andre Patterson, I'm totally fine with this draft pick. It's going to be pretty interesting to see. Now, the Vikings defensive end group was not as good as it used to be, obviously highlighted by Danielle Hunter. And then whoever's going to be our starting right defensive end, whether that's Wanham or Weatherly. Outside of that, we didn't have much depth at the defensive end position. Last year, we saw Jalen Holmes, who had a terrible season. We saw Afadi, who did not have a good season. We saw this Brailford guy. We saw Mataafa. So it was not a very good season when it comes to defensive ends last year. But going into this upcoming season, I would expect a lot of those players I just mentioned not even be on the team, not making the roster. But I do think that Janarius Robinson will make the roster, and then same with Patrick Jones, who will be backup defensive ends to our starters, alongside obviously Weatherly or Wanham, depending on who's going to be starting. And then 5th and 6th rounds. Now, I love this pick. Drafting Amir Smith Marcedi, wide receiver from Iowa. I didn't even expect this guy to come play with the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, I did not like this guy. As a Gophers fan, wasn't a huge fan of this guy. Now, he made a big splash in the Big Ten, but he is elite. Being drafted in the 5th round, you can find wide receivers in the 5th round like this every year. This is a very good draft class. You remember when the Buccaneers drafted Tyler Johnson last year? They found him in the 5th round. I mean, you can find players who can make insane catches. This guy can make one-hand catches in his sleep, and he falls to the 5th round because there is so many wide receivers that you can find. Now, when it comes to route running ability, he's pretty versatile, but he's not the best at one thing, which is what you usually like in the NFL, where you'll draft some player in the first couple rounds because they're a stud at one thing, and that's one thing is all you need him to do in the NFL. He's pretty versatile, but I would expect him to be a wide receiver 5 going into this upcoming season, which is actually pretty good. I do think the Vikings only need 5 wide receivers. Obviously, it's highlighted by Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. We have BB and BC inside the slot, and then you can find a use for Amir somewhere in that lineup. Obviously, I'm saying here that KJ Osborne, I don't think he's going to make this upcoming roster. I hate to say it because he was a 5th-round draft pick, but he was mostly drafted to be a special teams returner. If he can't do that, there's no reason why to have KJ Osborne on your roster. I do think he'll go to the practice squad this upcoming season, and Amir will be our 5th wide receiver on our depth chart, which is pretty good. I mean, having 5 wide receivers is really all you need in the NFL when you have a wide receiver group like the Vikings have, where we have an elite wide receiver duo and then BB and BC who can make some plays when you rotate them in. Zach Davidson, tight end from Central Michigan or Central Missouri. I had to do some research on this guy because I've never heard of this guy in my life when the Vikings drafted him, and he looks good. He looks good. Now he's coming from a Division II school with Central Missouri. I give this pick a B. Now he's going to play against Brandon Dillon for that for that tight end 3 role, and it's going to be. I would like to see that unfold in practice, in the practice games and during preseason. It's going to be interesting to see him going against Brandon Dillon to see which one is better, because we have not seen a lot from Brandon Dillon so far. We saw 1 catch last year, a 6-yard reception. He did make some blocks, very good blocks, when Kyle Rudolph got injured, but you need a good tight end 3 in the NFL nowadays. Obviously, Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin is a great tight end duo, but you need a good tight end 3, and you really only need 3 tight ends on your depth chart. So either Zach Davidson or Brandon Dillon will have that tight end 3 role. The other one will likely be on the practice squad, but I would like to see that unfold. So he seems pretty happy to play with the Minnesota Vikings too. Pretty slow guy, not super athletic, but again, he's massive, and that's what you want in a tight end. I think he's like 6'7", 250, insane length, wingspan. So Vikings will find a use for him for sure, especially in the blocking game. I can't say he's going to be the best wide receiver, but for his size, he will be used a lot in the blocking game. And then in the 6th round, 199th overall, the Minnesota Vikings drafted Jalen Twywan, defensive tackle from Pittsburgh. I give this pick an A, and he was a teammate with Patrick Jones, so they're coming in together, both defensive linemen. It's going to be interesting to see. Now, our defensive tackle group is looking really good compared to how it was last year. Last year, we had Jaleel Johnson and Shamar Stephen as starters. Both of them are gone. Now we have Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson. That is a huge increase from last year at both the defensive end position and the defensive tackle position. And our backups are Armon Watts, James Lynch, and now Twywan. There's also Jalen Holmes, but I did not want to mention him. I don't think he's going to make this upcoming roster. I would expect the Vikings to cut him and move him maybe to the practice squad or just cut him in general. So he's also a defensive end. He played defensive end last year, but he's built like a defensive tackle. But Jalen Twywan will be a defensive tackle, 6'2", 301 pounds with 10-inch hands. So a very good backup defensive tackle, and Andre Patterson will find a use for him. I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of him as a rookie. Obviously, 6th-round draft pick. We have Armon Watts and James Lynch, who are 2 great backups right there. And then our starters are amazing as well. So I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of him, but I do think he's going to be on the active roster or practice squad for about half of the season, I would say. So this is a very good draft pick for the draft class for the Minnesota Vikings, and its overall grade is a B+. When I averaged all the grades, it was a B+. I got to say this is an A. It has to be an A, because you have to take into the fact that the Vikings traded down 9 spots and got Christian Darrisaw, Kellen Mond, and Wyatt Davis from one trade. So you have to give this an A+. That was a tremendous trade for the Minnesota Vikings. And it might not have looked like it at start because, yes, trading down 9 spots, you didn't think the Vikings would be able to get Darrisaw. They did land Darrisaw, which was a steal. Wyatt Davis was another massive steal. And then Kellen Mond, he was drafted about where his value was, but he's a quarterback, and this is what the Vikings needed, was a backup quarterback for Nate Stanley to be a quarterback 3. And then Jake Browning, I don't know what's going to happen with him, but he'll probably be on the practice squad if you ask me. This was a very good draft class for the Minnesota Vikings, and if I was to say my favorite, it would have to be Wyatt Davis. Just because finding a player like him in the 3rd round was such a relief for the Minnesota Vikings, because our offensive guards are so bad. I don't want to see any more Dakota Dozier. I don't want to see any more of Drew Samia. We have like this Mason Cole guy. There's Kyle Hinton, who we also don't know how they're going to look really, who haven't really improved very much in the NFL from college. So Drew Samia especially, he looks terrible, and he was a 3rd-round draft pick in 2018. He might not even make the active roster this upcoming season. That's how bad of a season he had. So if Wyatt Davis can make can be a week 1 starter for the Minnesota Vikings alongside Christian Darrisaw, and they can be week 1 starters, this Vikings offensive line will all be on the rookie contracts, and it will be an elite offensive line. I do believe that to be true. Now, Brian O'Neill actually won't be in his rookie contract, because although he does have 1 more year left on his rookie contract, he will get a contract extension, so he'll be an exception, but still, he'll be in his 4th season. This is a very young offensive line, and it's going to be very impressive. I love these draft picks for the Minnesota Vikings, especially the Wyatt Davis pick and the Kellen Mond pick and the Christian Darrisaw pick. So all the picks that we got from that trading down 9 spots with the New York Jets, I give this an A+ just because of that. But when I average all the grades, it's a B+, if that makes any sense. So very happy with the Minnesota Vikings draft picks. Let me know what you guys' grades are for all these draft picks, who you're the most excited to see. I'm also excited to see the running back from Iowa State because that man could run. He was a track star. He can run a 4.4. He's tiny. He can make a big impact as a running back 3 and especially as a kick returner. So let me know what y'all think.